November 2011 was a big moment in gaming history. As I'm sure a lot of you already know, Skyrim came out on the 11th of November that year, and it sold like crazy. But some of you may be forgetting that a mere 7 days later, a brand new mainline Zelda game came out. Now, I'm gonna be real with you guys. Back then, I could care less about the Elder Scrolls games. Obviously, that's changed since I've gotten older and experienced Skyrim for myself, but at the time, all I ever cared about was Zelda. I remember when they first showed off the concept art for Skyward Sword. It was this ridiculously cool poster that was a perfect blend of the more realistic Twilight Princess art style, fused with the cartoony and lighthearted nature of Wind Waker. This was the first time in my life I ever felt true excitement for a video game coming out, and it was also the first game I ever got on release day. Needless to say, when I decided I was going to replay Skyward Sword all over again a few months ago, I was worried that I couldn't properly review a game that was mostly buried in nostalgia for me. That's when I gave it a try, and after a few hours, I dropped the game and never went back. I realized that while there's a lot of charm in the classic Skyward Sword, it's pretty rough to go back and play now. The unskippable dialogue and cutscenes felt super outdated, the pacing of the game felt unnatural and forced at times, and seriously, don't even get me started with the motion controls. I felt pretty disappointed. Defeated even, as if I wanted to prove that a game I used to love so much could withstand the test of time and remain an important part of gaming history. But out of the blue, during a Nintendo Direct earlier this year, we got some pretty crazy news. Skyward Sword is coming to Switch, and it's not just a port, but a remastered HD version. I was super excited, and while I still have a huge problem with paying $60 for a game that came out 10 years ago, I couldn't help but see it as an opportunity, another chance for Skyward Sword to prove itself. So now that we got this long-winded and unnecessary intro out of the way, I hope you enjoy my review of Skyward Sword HD on the Nintendo Switch. Skyward Sword takes place at the very beginning of the extremely confusing and convoluted Zelda timeline. In a lot of ways, it's an origin story. We get to see the first iterations of Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf, we get to experience how the cycle of good versus evil started, and it's also the origin of how the land of Hyrule itself began. Back in those days, Hyrule pretty much consisted of a bunch of floating rocks in the sky where everybody lived, because allegedly the surface world is too unsafe. Because of this, people get around by flying on these giant birds called loft wings, which are a big part of the gameplay itself. As you can imagine, Skyward Sword is a huge departure from the usual stories told in Zelda games, but there's still that classic Zelda formula of being on a quest to save the princess, going through a bunch of dungeons filled with puzzles, gathering an arsenal of cool gadgets, and engaging in climactic boss battles. The story in this game is fine, it's on par with the majority of other Zelda games. I do, however, think Link is a lot more interesting in this one because it's the first time we get actual dialogue options. The story is pretty simple, which I think is fine for the most part, but there are a lot of pretty unnecessary cutscenes that just hammer exposition into the player. Luckily, in Skyward Sword HD, you actually get the option to skip these cutscenes, which made a massive difference. Also, I noticed there has been a lot of unnecessary dialogue cut from the game, which makes the slow start feel much quicker. I definitely like it more when a game jumps right into the action, and the introduction feels like it's been cut down to a much more bearable length. Also, remember those annoying pop-ups from Link's follower Fi that happen literally every 10 seconds on the Wii version? The HD version has a lot less of those, and you can skip through them a lot faster. Anyways, let's talk about the gameplay a bit because Skyward Sword feels very different on the Switch. There is still the option for motion controls if you want to hold the Joy-Cons, but my favorite addition here has to be the joystick sword controls. Basically, instead of wiggling your wrist around like a madman, now you can just flick the joystick to swing your sword, which is so much better. I won't lie, it took a long time to get used to, but I definitely got the hang of it a lot earlier than I would have with motion controls. Fighting some of the bosses with your sword is ridiculously frustrating, not because it's hard to fight or anything, but it just takes so long because the controls feel so wacky. Using the bow and arrow and a few other items feels a bit clunky, and I don't think I ever fully got a grasp on them, but I still probably would have chosen this over the classic version's controls. By the way, I totally forgot how much I enjoyed the dungeons in Skyward Sword. They all feel really unique, like the Sandship dungeon, which takes place entirely on a boat going over sand. I guess that's a bit obvious. The puzzles are a lot of fun to figure out, and while a lot of them require you to do an uncomfortable input with your remote or resort to motion controls, they all feel pretty satisfying to solve. To sum up the gameplay, compared to what it was before, there's been a massive improvement. Compared to other similar games or even past Zelda titles, the controls don't really hold up as well. Game controls should feel like second nature at some point. Once you get used to them, you shouldn't have to look down at your remote at all, but I found myself doing it all the time in Skyward Sword. With all that aside, Skyward Sword HD is a ridiculous improvement from the original, but somehow, although it's a brand new game, the controls still feel outdated and played out. I think there is a lot more quality of life here, whether it be skipping headache-inducing cutscenes or leaving entirely pointless sections out. But still, to pay full price for a game that came out 10 years ago, I expected something more than just quality of life improvement. All that being said, I'm gonna give Skyward Sword a 6.5 out of 10. I'm just hoping that in the future, when they bring out remasters of old Zelda games, they put a little more love into it. But what do you think? Is Skyward Sword HD worth the full price tag of a brand new game? Are you a fan of the new controls? Make sure to let me know down in the comments, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing. I post new game reviews every week, so subscribe for more of those. Anyways, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Keep gaming to the fullest, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.